Hello, welcome to Central Nervous System 7. This is the last of the videos for the central nervous system, and this video will cover functional brain systems. And functional brain systems, they're just networks of neurons. They work together, but they span really wide areas of the brain. And the two functional brain systems we'll talk about today are the limbic system and the reticular formation. So this cartoon, sure my pen works, yep. So this cartoon shows the limbic system, and you can see here they do a mid-sagittal section of the brain, and then they look inside to see all the structures of the limbic system. And you can see here it says diencephalic structures of the limbic system. So remember the diencephalon contains the thalamus and the epithalamus and the hypothalamus, but it's also diencephalon is also part of the limbic system. And then the central structures of the limbic system are over here. They include the cingulate gyrus, septal nuclei. So remember, a nucleus is just a group of cell bodies in the central nervous system. And then this thing here, this kind of bulbous structure, that's the amygdaloid body. And then this structure is the hippocampus. If you've had psychology, they probably mentioned the hippocampus and memory. And then you have the dentate gyrus here. So I don't know why they called it dentate unless it looks like teeth, like dental. And then the parahippocampal gyrus, or so para just means around. And the other functional brain system includes the reticular formation, and we went over this slide, I think, in the last video, but in number 1 here it says sensory axons, synapse on reticular activating system neurons in the brainstem. So sensory axons, those would be axons from sensory afferent neurons coming from the periphery, sensing things in your environment. And then number 2, reticular activating system neurons here will relay sensory stimuli to the cerebrum throughout the thalamus. So here's the thalamus. And then number 3, it says the continuous stream of sensory stimuli keeps the cerebrum alert. And so these purple arrows represent the continuous stream of sensory stimuli. So that's stimulus and action potential to the cerebrum. So the limbic system, you find the structures on medial aspects of cerebral hemisphere and the diencephalon. So we talked about the diencephalon. The medial aspect of the cerebral hemisphere, just remember we had lateral and medial, so medial would be towards the midline. And this structure called the fornix, that's a fiber tract, so that's axons in a tract in the central nervous system. And the fornix links all the limbic system regions. So a large part of the emotional or affective brain is the limbic system. 3 structures that I want you to know for the test include, you don't have to know what they do, but you have to recognize that these are structures of the limbic system. The amygdaloid body, aka the amygdaloid nucleus, that recognizes angry or fearful facial expressions. So that's kind of interesting. So specifically, it recognizes a fearful facial expression in someone else, maybe in yourself too, I'm not sure. Amygdaloid body will assess danger, and it will elicit a fear response, and we'll talk about what the fear response is at fight or flight with the sympathetic nervous system. We'll talk about that when we do the autonomic nervous system. Then there's the cingulate gyrus, so this area here. That plays a role in expressing your emotions via your gestures. The cingulate gyrus also helps resolve mental conflict, so that could be really helpful. And then the hippocampus and the amygdaloid body also play a role in memory. The limbic system puts an emotional response to odors. It's kind of interesting. Plays a role in psychosomatic illness. And the limbic system interacts with the prefrontal lobe to help us react emotionally to things that we're consciously watching, and we're understanding what we're seeing. And the limbic system allows us to be consciously aware of the emotional richness in our lives. That's pretty cool. Okay, the next system is the reticular formation. So the motor function helps control coarse limb movements via these reticulospinal tracts. And then reticular autonomic centers regulate visceral motor functions. So visceral motor functions include blood vessels, the heart, and the lungs. And then there's 3 broad columns or fasciculi that run the length of the brainstem. So here's the brainstem, the midbrain, pons, and medulla. 3 broad columns, and they have these names, the raphe nuclei, medial group of nuclei, and the lateral group of nuclei that are part of the reticular formation. Reticular formation has axonal connections with the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is right here. Has connections with the thalamus here. The cerebral cortex, all up here. The cerebellum, so here's the cerebellum. And the spinal cord here. So all these connections allow the reticular formation, aka the reticular activating system, all those connections allow it to govern the state of arousal in your brain. And then here's some more facts on the reticular activating system. This is kind of interesting. The reticular activating system is inhibited by sleep centers, alcohol, and drugs. So that makes sense. You're less alert if you're inhibiting a system that makes you alert. You're less alert when you're drinking alcohol or taking drugs. It just says drugs. Does it say legal or illegal? Drugs. Okay. We're going to look at some higher mental functions. So if you want to analyze higher mental functions, you want to understand how well they're functioning, you can look at language, memory, brain waves, and EEGs, consciousness, sleep-wake cycles. You can use all these tactics to analyze how well one is functioning at a higher level. And then we've got memory and language. So here, memory and language, they have overlapping domains. And it doesn't really show it well in this picture, but you know that Wernicke's and Broca's area deal with language. And then memory is the hippocampus, which is here somewhere, but it doesn't really show it on the cartoon. But memory and language have overlapping domains, but specific motor and sensory functions are located in separate domains. So for example, the motor domain, your motor functions are anterior to the central sulcus, and your sensory functions are posterior to the central sulcus. So like I said before, if you've had psychology, you probably went over this. Memory is just storage of information and then being able to retrieve that information. There's different kinds of memory. There's a lot of different ways to break down memory to study it, but in this slide we're going to say there's different kinds of memory, including declarative memory, procedural or non-declarative memory, motor memory, and emotional memory. So there's more than that, but just for the purposes of this talk, we'll say there's declarative, non-declarative, motor, and emotional memories. So declarative memory is memory of facts. It's like a declarative sentence. You declare something. So declarative memory is the fact of someone's name, their face, the words and dates. Non-declarative or procedural memory is memory of skills, like playing a piano. Motor memory is memory of motor skills, like riding a bike. And emotional memory is memory of experiences, obviously linked to emotion, like your heart pounding when you get ready to take the test on this chapter. So in this cartoon, we see at the top, it says outside stimuli. You go to your vision. Oh, look at this. And there's a tack in that person's finger. You can use your auditory apparatus to hear things. You can use your nose to smell things. So this is in this blue box, these are just general and special sensory receptors. So obviously special senses would include the eye, the ear, and the nose, and we'll talk about those on another video. And then a general sense would just be this tack, eliciting pain in your finger. So you get this outside stimuli, and then via sensory afferent inputs goes to the brain. You get temporary storage in the cerebral cortex, and then some data is selected for transfer into short-term memory. Some data is permanently lost, this data that you collected with your senses. And then in short-term memory, sometimes you can just forget the data you put in short-term memory, and that's lost. But when you transfer short-term memory into long-term memory, that data transfer is influenced by things like being excited, rehearsal, so memorizing things, and then associating new data with stored data. So if you can associate this data that you stored in short-term memory with something that you already have data for, then you'll be able to store it more efficiently in long-term memory storage. Okay, so now this is quite shifting gears. So this is development of the neural plate and tube from embryonic ectoderm. So try to remember back when you were a little embryo in the uterus and you want to first start to form your nervous system. Well, the first thing you do, so here you are as a little embryo blast. If you take this would be like a transverse section through the embryo blast, and then you take this piece, bring it over here, and look at it. And to begin to form your nervous system, you have this thing called a neural plate that will eventually form your neural tube and then your nervous system. But the neural plate forms from this stuff called ectoderm. So when you're a little embryo, you have ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, and all those derms will form all the parts of your body. So in step 2, you'll have these, so you've got the neural plate, you've got the neural folds. What happens is the neural folds will start migrating towards each other to form this thing called a neural crest. And the neural crest will form a lot of the peripheral nervous system. And then as time goes on and you develop more in utero, this thing that you form called a neural groove in step 2 will close and become, the neural groove will become the neural tube, and the neural tube will form central nervous system structures. So the first sign that the NS is nervous system. The first sign that the nervous system is forming in the embryo is that this surface ectoderm starts to get thick and forms a neural plate. And then we went through the other steps. And now to shift gears again, this is a photograph of someone getting an EEG. Electroencephalography is the study of this, study of brain waves. And then down here is it's a sketch of brain waves in EEGs. That these brain waves fall into 4 general classes. You have alpha waves. So if you're awake, but you're very relaxed and you have you're getting an electroencephalography, and you're being studied by an electroencephalographer, then your brain waves would look like this. If you're awake but you're alert, you're not so relaxed, but you're alert, you have beta waves. Theta waves are common in children, and when you're doing deep sleep, you have these EEG waves called delta waves. Each person's brain waves are unique, and the brainwave patterns will change with age, disease, and the chemical state of the body. So I showed you that cartoon so we could talk a little bit about sleep. So there's types and stages of sleep. Probably everyone's heard of REM sleep, rapid eye movement. But then following that, there's non-rapid eye movement, or NREM sleep. And NREM sleep is broken down into 4 stages. And each one of those stages, you have different brain waves associated with that stage. So for example, NREM stage 1, you have alpha waves. And then you have this unique pattern with stage 2. Stage 3, you have theta and delta waves. And then stage 4 is dominated by delta waves. And basically for the test, just want you to know that this NREM sleep exhibits 4 distinct stages, and they appear to alternate, so they're not all the same. And these are just this is just a table to show you the major functions of the brain regions that we've talked about, kind of a synopsis. And that's it.